Warning, before we begin, be advised that this episode contains descriptions of violence and sexual assault that people may find disturbing. Please listen at your discretion.
What
I experienced was ugly, criminal, and unbelievable. It happened on the 9th of November. It was a difficult day. I was going to lose my life, along with 10 other detainees in my cell. More than 20 masked Israeli jailers, including security officers, intelligence officers, and the prison director too. They entered the room after they cuffed our hands and blindfolded us and made us kneel on our knees. They came in with their batons and sticks. They were completely geared up. They had police dogs and firearms as well. And then they started beating us severely.
This is 50-year-old Firas Hassan talking about his time in Israeli prison. He was detained on August 10, 2022. It was a hot and windy day in Beit Lahem. Firas's life as a father and a student would fall apart in a matter of hours, scarring him with memories that haunt him until this day. Accompanied by his 10-year-old son, Firas was on his way to Ramallah's Al-Quds Open University, where he was pursuing a master's degree. He would end up spending 603 days, or nearly 20 months, in Israeli detention.
They were filming the incident and laughing. They cut my beard off with scissors. Then they hit me in my face, and it started bleeding badly. My eyes swelled up, and they could see this. They could see the blood streaming from my face, from my forehead, and my nose. I was screaming, crying for help. The other detainees were also screaming because of the beating they were enduring.
The incident that he describes as his worst during his incarceration was not his only instance of abuse, he told The National. Right after it happened, one of his cellmates confided in him.
He said to me, Abu Ahmed, they raped me. They inserted a stick in my sensitive area. This detainee was with me in the same room. He's my friend and a brother. I hugged him as he cried. He was in pain, physically and psychologically.
Some of the masked officers he described are presumed to be from the Israeli Prison Service's Rapid Response Unit, or Keter, a special riot control squad. Firas said they beat him and his cellmates on their backs, chests, faces, and rib cages. When they called for a doctor, they were told that they would not even be given painkillers, that they were being kept alive, but barely.
We felt we would be killed, that we would die. The intention of the Israel Prison Service was to beat the detainees to death.
What Firas and his cellmates went through that day was not the first or the last time, and it wasn't unique either. Dozens of released Palestinian detainees from Gaza and the West Bank have given Israeli human rights group B'Tselem and others testimonies of intensified violence, assault, and torture becoming commonplace in Israeli prisons since October 7.
Every day there would be an attack on about 3 cells in the same section. And every day we hear the screams from the other rooms. Even in the other sections, we found out that during the head counts, the guard would beat the detainees. We would hear them scream. Every day we would live in fear and terror.
In recent weeks, human rights organizations and media investigations have documented the worsening conditions in Israeli prisons over the past 10 months. They reveal that beatings and other forms of brutal physical and psychological abuse are implemented regularly. In a statement to The National, the Israeli Prison Service rejected any and all of these claims. Up until the end of June, the number of Palestinian detainees arrested by Israel reached almost 10,000. That's double the figure it was before October 2023 and includes arbitrary administrative detention, where a person is held indefinitely under secret charges without trial. A report released by the UN Human Rights Office on July 31st about the ill treatment and torture of Palestinian detainees states that the conditions before October 7 were already concerning, but have dramatically deteriorated in the aftermath. Since then, at least 53 detainees from Gaza and the West Bank have died in Israeli detention, the report said. This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada AlTaher. In this episode, we spoke to 2 Palestinian detainees about their lives before and after October 7. There are allegations of torture and violence at the hands of Israeli forces, and we hear a response to these claims by the Israel Prison Service. We also spoke to an Israeli human rights group about how conditions got so bad. Firas had been in Israeli prison under administrative detention long before October 7. To this day, he has not seen the evidence used for keeping him there. Firas says conditions in prison were relatively tolerable before October of last year. But then, things seemed to shift almost overnight.
Conditions changed completely. I describe this change as a tsunami.
On the day of the Hamas attack that killed 1,200 people in Israel, the guards were noticeably on edge, he says. Within the first 24 hours, the detainees were locked in their cells and forbidden from going out. Over the next few days, the guards armed up, police dogs were brought in, food was restricted, and prisoners' belongings were confiscated.
The major issue is that they brought in firearms, which had previously been unauthorized. There was also no longer any medical treatments or medicines. We were not allowed to listen to the radio. We couldn't ask for food. Everything that was allowed before is now prohibited.
Firas had never witnessed beatings prior. He says it was a red line.
But after 3 or 4 days, this red line was crossed, and the first Palestinian detainee was beaten. That's when we felt things were completely different now.
About a week after the UN report came out, the leading Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem released its own report titled Welcome to Hell. The title comes from something an Israeli soldier told one of the detainees upon his arrival to Megiddo prison. Both reports document widespread violence that include beatings, sexual assault, and police dog attacks. They detail tactics that may amount to torture, such as forcing detainees to kneel in prolonged positions of duress, forced starvation, and sleep deprivation. There are countless accounts of humiliation and degradation, as well as denied access to water for washing, hygiene products, legal counsel, and family visits. The UN report describes these practices as a collective punitive measure against Palestinians. B'Tselem's report calls it a, quote, network of torture camps, where this has become a systematic institutional policy by Israel. I spoke to B'Tselem's spokesman, Shai Parnes, about their findings.
What we've seen in the last 9 or 10 months, it's a policy of abuse. So prisons in all prison facilities that Palestinians are held are subjected to this severe violence, starvation, humiliation, sleep deprivations. That include also degradation, cursing their mom, making them bark like dogs, making them kiss the guards' boots, and whatever form of degradation and humiliation. We have some testimonies about sexual assaults on the entire spectrum from, let's say, or call it sexual harassment, all the way to rapes. I can't say how common it is, but we've seen more than a few testimonies complaining about this kind of behaviors in different facilities, both by male and female, I must add. From nude search by a lot of them, sometimes by the opposite gender, and entering a female cell without any notice, or some of them are married Muslim women, and touching them or pushing them or beating them, of course, by male and females, and all the way to inserting objects inside people's body parts.
Shai says that as they collected the testimonies, they were shocked to see how similar they were to one another across genders and across prisons.
We got the first testimonies, I believe, in February or March, and we were, okay, we'll collect some testimonies, but this one seems really horrific. It might be like, it's probably unique, but as time goes by, we've seen dozens of testimonies of released people, as I said, which are pretty much similar. About the starvation, prisoners from all over the facilities, they were naming the same amounts of no food. That's how similar it was. That's why we say it's a policy. I would add that there's testifiers from 16 facilities, 13 of them under Israeli prison system, and 3 of them under the military. And those testifiers are from West Bank, from Gaza Strip, and even 4 of them are Palestinians, Israeli citizens.
At the start of August, Israel's Channel 12 aired CCTV footage of what it said was the Sdei Man field detention camp. The news report said that the video showed Israeli soldiers sexually abusing a Palestinian detainee. The UN Human Rights Office released a statement calling for the urgent need for a full-scale investigation into Israel's detention practices after the video started to circulate. The Israeli army later arrested 9 soldiers suspected in the incident, causing much uproar by Israelis who protested their arrest. The facility was already the subject of scrutiny after a whistleblower revealed other horrific practices there, like shackling detainees to beds and feeding them through straws. Some even had their legs amputated because of the injuries it caused. As more incidents continue to be documented, Shai says the motives appear to be strictly punitive.
What we've seen is that a lot of the beating, the sexual assault, and all this kind of stuff, it's not happening during interrogation. The beating is now part of the routine. It can happen whenever, like during the night, during the day, wake you up at the middle of the night if you manage to get some sleep. It's not a matter of, it's just a tool of being more cruel and to torture the prisoner. It's not about the interrogation or to get more information about anything.
This seemed to be the case with 53-year-old Atif Awawde from the Khalil district. He was imprisoned in August 2023 and was held in Awfer, Ketziat, and Nafha prisons. He learned that he was being arrested along with 3 of his sons because of his 4th son's involvement with the Jenin brigades. In an interrogation with Israeli intelligence, he says he was asked to surrender his estranged son over to them, even as he was behind prison walls. But on October 8, his son, and the reason behind his incarceration, was killed, and Atif was not released. Even though there was no information they needed from him anymore, Atif continued to be detained arbitrarily, and he spent the rest of his incarceration witnessing the same ill treatment as others. In addition to the more obvious forms of abuse, Atif also described the less visible forms of humiliation and hardship.
When they sent us to Nafha prison, of course we were strip searched. When they strip search you, they tell you to put your clothes to one side. If you have 2 garments of clothing, they'll confiscate one of them. So you have to live in prison with only the one item of clothing that's on your back. You can't even change your clothes. And we're not allowed pillows. And they even confiscated the top of the mattress.
He says even the window panes would be removed during the cold winter nights.
The food was very scarce. What they would provide for 10 people was enough for only 1 person, if even that. When we received soup from the administrators, we would add our own water to it so that there's enough to go around.
By the time Atif was released on January 31st of this year, 5 months after being detained, he had lost about 19 kilograms because of food deprivation. His appearance changed so drastically that he became unrecognizable. Atif recalled a lot of similar experiences as Firas and other detainees during his incarceration. He was beaten, cuffed until his wrists bled, and made to watch as other detainees were tormented. He also recounts the incident of his cellmate, Mohammed al-Sabbar, who died because of medical negligence.
He was a young man, around the age of my own children. I considered him as my son. I used to take care of him.
Mohammed was a special needs person who was diagnosed with a disease since birth called Hirschsprung. It's a condition in which nerves are missing from the intestines and affects digestion. His case was also referenced in the UN report.
He couldn't go to the bathroom for about 9 days. We kept asking the administrators to treat him, but they had informed us that they stopped all treatment by that point. If he stays this way, he's going to die.
Atif tried to help by offering him some of his water and food to help with his digestion. He got better eventually, but the next time his condition flared up, Mohammed died.
He died of medical negligence. This was a clear-cut case of medical negligence.
We reached out to the Israel Prison Service, or IPS for short, to be interviewed for this story and requested comments from them about every single allegation in this episode. A spokesperson responded with a written statement. It says,
IPS is a law enforcement organization that operates according to the provisions of the law and under the supervision of the state comptroller and many other official critiques. All prisoners are detained according to the law. All basic rights required are fully applied by professionally trained prison guards. We are not aware of the claims you described, and as far as we know, no such events have occurred under IPS responsibility. Nonetheless, prisoners and detainees have the right to file a complaint that will be fully examined and addressed by official authorities.
I asked Shai about how far up this goes.
I don't know about each and every measurement, but we've seen in the reports that the commanders of the facilities, according to the testifiers, were sometimes present during the beatings or stuff like that. But we don't know. It's not like there's never an actual command. But this whole so-called revolution or sadistic revolution in the Israeli prison system is, of course, inspired by the government and by the minister who is in charge of the Israeli prison system. Those who were held before October 7th attack say as soon as Ben Gvir was appointed to the job, the condition got worsened, but still, as they put it, they were treated as human beings. And after October 7th, all hell broke loose.
The Israeli Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has made no secret of his stance on downgrading prison conditions. In public tweets, he writes, quote, "The goal I have set for myself is to worsen the conditions of the terrorists in the prisons and to reduce their rights to the minimum required by law. After the outbreak of the war, I was able to finally carry out the long-awaited reform." On the issue of overcrowding in prisons, he also says, quote, "I have already proposed a much simpler solution of enacting the death penalty for terrorists." We reached out to Ben-Gvir's office for a comment, but they referred us to the Israel Prison Service. In its statement to the National, the IPS says, quote,
"As instructed by Minister Ben-Gvir, the prison conditions of the national security prisoners have been made strict since October 7, 2023, in accordance with the minister's policy of stopping the improved prison conditions they have received in the past. Regardless, since October 7, 2023, several petitions regarding mistreatment and the conditions in IPS facilities were submitted to the Supreme Court by human rights organizations. The court has not found any foundations to these claims, and the petitions were denied.
August 12 marked the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, which shaped the foundations of international humanitarian law. They mandate that detainees must be treated humanely and be protected from torture, murder, and humiliation. This applies in all instances, even when detainees are suspected of being involved in hostilities. Shai says what's happening now sets a dangerous precedent.
As soon as these kind of tools enter in the system, it's not going to stop there. It's already horrific, of course, when it's for the Palestinians. But once the staff, that's the way he deals with prisoners. That's the way the system is acting with prisoners. It's not going to end only with Palestinians prisoners.
As for Firas and Atif and the thousands of Palestinian detainees in similar circumstances, their scars are still scabbing.
The wound remains deep. The pain remains great. And if I'm being honest, sometimes my emotional state haunts me.
Going back to normal life after this imprisonment is not easy, because you're constantly thinking. When I think about the detainees, I cry for them. I think to myself, if I'm ever sent back to prison, I'd rather die. Death would be easier than prison.
That's it from Beyond the Headlines. For a more in-depth look at this story, visit thenationalnews.com. This episode was produced by Ben Barqawi and Arthur Edison, with additional help from Mahmoud Rida and Fathi Ben Isa. Yasmin Al-Taji is the assistant producer and Dua Farid is our editor. And I'm your host, Nada AlTaher.